The first red flag wasn't the email. It was the seating chart. My name is Marisa Lane. I'm 54 years old, and apparently that was old enough for my new leadership team at Crestline Freight Systems to decide I had aged out of innovation. After 21 years of keeping their patchwork digital infrastructure alive through outages, acquisitions, ransomware scares, and 3 CIOs who couldn't tell the difference between a data warehouse and an actual warehouse, I found myself quietly demoted from my glass-walled operations hub to a wobbling folding table next to a printer that jammed every 8 minutes. No meeting, no warning. Just a chipper HR message. So excited for your seasoned perspective in the new space. Seasoned perspective. Like I was a historic artifact on loan from a technology museum. Meanwhile, I was the engineer who rebuilt their entire routing backbone in 2018 after an update from a flashy vendor bricked half the company's West Coast distribution. I didn't yell. I didn't complain. I packed my stainless steel thermos, my encrypted drive, and the tiny bonsai tree I'd nursed through 4 reorganizations, and I walked downstairs quiet, precise, controlled. Just like the people with real power always do. 2 weeks later, the real trouble arrived, wearing a designer suit and a vocabulary full of buzzwords. His name was Kellen Drake, our freshly imported Director of Next Wave Innovation. 34. Fresh MBA, full of confidence not earned through experience but through LinkedIn quotes about disruption. Kellen called our hybrid legacy environment prehistoric, our middleware embarrassingly patched, and once referred to my role as transition talent. Transition talent. As if my entire career was a temporary placeholder so someone younger could slide into the seat I'd spent 2 decades earning. I stayed professional. I documented everything. I kept the entire system breathing while he practiced TED Talk gestures in conference rooms he didn't book. Then at 1 p.m., a calendar invite popped onto my screen. Subject: quick sync before our update. Time: 1:30 p.m. No agenda, no details. Just a star emoji, the kind inexperienced managers use when they're about to ruin someone's week. I'd been through enough reorganizations to know exactly what a star emoji meant. At 1:30, in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and wet carpet, Kellen folded his hands, leaned forward, and delivered the line he had obviously rehearsed in the mirror. Marisa, we need fresher energy for where this company is heading. There it was. No point pretending. I was being eliminated for aging out of the future. But here's what Kellen Drake didn't know, and what Crestline Freight was about to learn the hard way. You can fire the veteran, but you can't fire the backbone built by her hands. Their entire digital ecosystem was balanced on my undocumented fixes, my emergency patches, my integrations, my midnight triage scripts. The moment they erased me from the system would erase itself. And I knew exactly how long it would take for the first cracks to start showing. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the company had just removed the only person who ever knew how everything actually worked. Kellen kept talking, stacking corporate politeness over the same recycled message. Too old, too slow, not future-minded enough. Beside him sat Dana Whitmore, the HR representative who blinked too fast whenever a conversation got legally uncomfortable. She clutched a beige folder like it was a coroner's report, not my personnel file. Marisa, she began with a brittle smile. We value your years here, and we've prepared a very generous transition package. Generous. Corporate code for, please leave quietly so we don't get sued. 6 weeks of severance, a few months of health coverage, and extremely positive references, as if compliments could replace 2 decades of dedication. I raised one hand, calm, steady, polite. You've already made the decision, I said. Kellen opened his mouth. Well, Marisa, there is room to this. No, I replied. You want younger talent, more digitally native. I understand. His smile faltered, the first visible crack in his borrowed confidence. There's a certain silence that fills a room when the person holding an entire company's technical skeleton simply accepts termination without tears, drama, or bargaining. A silence that says, you have no idea what you've just done. I shook both their hands. No theatrics, no accusations, just a clean break. Then I walked out. My new desk, a flimsy folding table, still showed 3 monitors flooded with real-time diagnostics. Every blinking green line represented a system I had kept alive long after Crestline refused to invest in proper infrastructure. I opened a drawer and set my encrypted drive on the table. Core operations, private configs. 19 years of undocumented patches, emergency scripts, and custom integrations lived on that drive. Not sabotage, not revenge, just reality. It was the only full documentation Crestline Freight ever had. I packed my bonsai tree, my thermos, the little 3D printed falcon my nephew made me. Then came the final 15 minutes of my employment. I didn't delete anything. I didn't break anything. I simply removed myself. I logged out of every credential, detached my username from automated schedulers, disabled emergency scripts tied to my ID, the ones quietly preventing disaster every night at 2:14 a.m. By 1:28 p.m., I was fully offboarded, 2 minutes before the meeting officially ended. At 1:30, I clicked sign out for the last time. Then I walked out of Crestline Freight with nothing but my laptop bag, my plant, and a clarity sharper than a blade. Because the system was now running without me, and they had no idea how fragile it truly was. My hands were steady when I stepped into the cold afternoon air. The winter breeze was sharp, clean, nothing like the recycled office oxygen where arrogance circulated best. I placed my laptop bag on the passenger seat of my aging Honda CR-V, 17 years old and still running smoother than half the cloud tools Crestline bragged about. I sat for a moment, breathing. Not angry, not heartbroken, just free. 9 minutes after I drove off the lot, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Crestline Help Desk. I let it ring. By the time I reached the first stoplight, it buzzed again. Warehouse ops. Urgent. Then again. Vendor portal authentication error. The cracks were coming. Not because I sabotaged anything, I didn't touch a single line of code. But because the entire system had always been a fragile tower of duct-taped legacy services glued to modern SaaS tools by custom scripts only I knew how to maintain. A structure that survived for 2 decades for one reason. I never let it fall. And now, I wasn't there. When I pulled into my driveway, the quiet of home wrapped around me like a blanket. Soft light through the kitchen window, faint lavender from last night's candle. Peace. Something Crestline had siphoned out of me for years. My phone buzzed again. Dana Whitmore, HR. Marisa, are you still on campus? We need your badge back. I set the phone face down on the counter. The next alert came faster, sharper. System alert. Distribution sync failure. System alert. Payment gateway timeout. System alert. Batch job 27 incomplete. I hadn't realized until that moment that my personal dashboard, the one I'd used for years as the unofficial first responder, still mirrored half the company's infrastructure. Old habits. Hard to kill. Error lines began climbing in patterns I knew better than my own heartbeat. The distribution sync was failing. First, of course it was. My credentials had been hard-coded in 3 different departments because Crestline leadership never approved the service accounts I begged for. Once that sync collapsed, vendor invoicing would stall, then inventory parsing, then the outbound routing engine. A perfect chain reaction. A digital game of dominoes they had spent years ignoring. My phone buzzed with a name I did expect. Evan Mercer, Senior Systems Analyst, 29. The only person Kellen respected because Evan could speak in buzzwords without stuttering. His message came in frantic bursts. Marisa, something's wrong. We can't access routing logs. Kellen thinks it's a server issue. Please, can you call me? I exhaled slowly. They fired me for being too old. But their entire operation had been built on the backs of the too experienced, the not modern enough, the ones they dismissed without understanding what those hands had been holding together. And now the first domino had fallen. Not because I pushed it, but because they removed the person who'd been preventing every collapse they never saw coming. The first voicemail arrived while I was boiling water for tea. Evan's voice sounded stretched thin, like he was trying to speak through a collapsing tunnel. Marisa, I don't know what's happening. The vendor integration is rejecting every token. Routing maps won't load. Kellen's pacing and yelling about resetting the cloud instance, which doesn't even apply here. Please, can you call me? I set the phone down and let the kettle whistle. For the first time in years, I allowed silence to fill the room. Then voicemail number 2 came in. This one belonged to Kellen Drake. The arrogance was gone. The bravado cracked wide open. Marisa, hi. Kellen here. He tried to sound calm, but his voice kept slipping like a man losing his footing on ice. We're encountering a few unexpected obstacles. Probably nothing serious, but we're having trouble accessing certain legacy pathways. If you could send over any documentation you might have, we'd really appreciate it. Documentation. The holy relic they never cared about. I had offered repeatedly to build a full documentation library. I offered to train staff, develop redundancy plans, standardize scripts. Leadership's response was always the same. We'll prioritize it next quarter. Next quarter never came. And now they were stumbling through a maze without a map. My personal monitoring dashboard lit up again. Vendor sync, down. Routing engine, offline. Payment gateway, stalling. Batch schedulers, disabled. Authentication chains, breaking. A full system meltdown. Predictable. Preventable. But inevitable once they pulled me out of the architecture like the keystone holding a stone arch together. Then came the video message from Evan. Shaky camera. Frantic whisper. Marisa, you need to see this. He flipped the camera toward the operations floor. It was chaos. Supervisors shouting at frozen dashboards. Shipment managers red-faced, trying to manually confirm routes that no longer existed. Analysts darting between stations like firefighters without hoses. 3 executives hovered behind them, whispering bitterly into their phones, sweat beating at their temples as if the system itself could smell their fear. Then the camera landed on Kellen. Tie crooked, sleeves rolled up, posture collapsing like wet cardboard. Someone handed him a printed error log. He slammed it onto the table. "This shouldn't be happening," he snapped. "We're cloud-driven now. Everything should autocorrect automatically." Someone off camera muttered, "Maybe the cloud hates you." If the situation weren't so catastrophic, it might have been funny. I paused the video and set my phone down. Crestline Freight was facing its first true crisis without the one person who had quietly kept its mismatched, underfunded, poorly maintained systems alive for more than 2 decades. They hadn't replaced me. They'd simply removed me. And now the tower they built on denial, shortcuts, and wishful thinking was collapsing exactly the way I warned it would. Then Evan's last message came in voice trembling, desperation bleeding through each syllable. Kellen told the floor managers it's a temporary glitch. People are panicking. Trucks are waiting for routes that won't load. Invoices are stuck. Nobody knows what to do. Marisa, please. What should I do? I closed my eyes. This wasn't revenge. This was reality. When a company disrespects the system eventually returns the favor.
The collapse didn't happen all at once. It unfolded in waves, each one louder, sharper, and more undeniable than the last. While Crestline Freight systems unraveled, I sliced fruit in my kitchen. The simple rhythm, clean cut, soft thud, felt almost meditative against the chaos erupting miles away. My home felt warm, grounded, human, a contrast so sharp it stung. My phone vibrated again. But this time it wasn't calls, it was system alerts. One after another, then 10 at a time. EDI pipeline failure routing orchestrator, dead invoice queue overflow scheduler, loopback detected, outbound allocation error. Crestline's digital heartbeat was flatlining. Not because I wanted it to, not because I triggered anything, but because the scaffolding they'd built was never meant to stand without the person who held the bolts together. Then came another video from Evan. The camera jittered as he whispered, "Marisa, things are bad. You don't understand." Oh, I understood. Better than anyone. He flipped the camera. This time, the operations war room looked like an ER during a mass casualty event. Analysts shouting across aisles, supervisors slamming keyboards, trucks stalled nationwide because they couldn't receive routing updates. Invoices stacked into six-figure losses by the minute, executives in expensive suits trying and failing to mask their panic. In the middle of it stood Kellen Drake, drowning in his own incompetence. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his voice cracking as he barked orders no one could follow because they made no technical sense. Someone handed him an emergency report. He scanned it, went pale, and whispered, "This can't be real." It was very real. Another supervisor yelled from across the room, "We've already missed 3 major delivery windows." Then another, "If billing doesn't process in the next hour, we violate contract terms." Executives swarmed around Kellen, demanding solutions he didn't have. His response? "Just reboot everything." The entire room froze. A full system reboot on a hybrid architecture with 20 years of legacy interdependencies? That wasn't problem solving, that was technological suicide. Then the feed cut off. A moment later, Evan's voice message arrived tighter, faster, urgent. A contractor tried to restart the routing engine. It made everything worse. Another one says your scheduler configurations are non-standard, whatever that means. They don't understand any of it. Of course they didn't. Understanding required history, context, experience. All the things Crestline dismissed. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Dana from HR. "Marisa, please call me immediately. We need to discuss your transition paperwork." Transition paperwork, a new phrase for panic. Almost instantly, another message. "And if possible, we'd appreciate any brief technical guidance." Brief technical guidance? Their entire digital organism was flat on the table, and they wanted a bandage. I stepped onto my porch, letting the cold air settle around me. The world outside was calm, still, unbothered by the crisis they created. Right then, another message popped up, this time from Evan. "Marisa, the COO just said they might need to bring you back. They want to talk to you directly. I think they finally understand." Finally. But understanding had a cost. And Crestline Freight was about to pay every penny. The call didn't arrive with panic this time. It arrived with polished corporate desperation, wrapped in a voice trying very, very hard to sound calm. My phone rang. Unknown number, corporate line. I let it ring twice before answering. "Ms. Lane," a man said, carefully measured, each word trembling beneath the surface. "This is Graham Rourke. Chief Operating Officer of Crestline Freight Systems. I'm hoping we can have a constructive conversation. Constructive. Corporate language for, we are losing millions and need you to stop the bleeding. I'm listening, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Rourke exhaled the kind of exhausted breath executives give only when they realize the problem is bigger than their ego. I'll be direct, he said. We're experiencing a severe systems disruption. Our distribution network is non-functional. Vendor billing has halted. Payroll won't initialize. 3 critical partners are demanding immediate explanations. He paused. Not awkwardly, accusingly. He knew exactly when the collapse began, the minute Crestline erased the woman holding their infrastructure together. We'd like to invite you back, he continued, in a consulting capacity, full remote access, whatever you require. There it was, the shift. Not an apology, not accountability. Just need. What are you offering? I asked. A premium hourly rate, he said. Very premium. Name your number. For 21 years, I've been told to do more with less, be a team player, stay flexible, adapt to new leadership. Now they wanted a number? Fine. $600 an hour, 40 hours prepaid, remote only, full administrative access. Silence. Heavy, bruised, expensive. Then, done. No negotiation, no pushback. Just surrender. As soon as the payment confirmation hit my inbox, my phone buzzed again, this time from Evan. Marisa, everyone on the floor just found out you're coming back as a consultant. They cheered. You should have seen Kellen's face. I could picture it perfectly. The man who dismissed my expertise now standing helpless in the ruins of a system he never understood. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and launched the remote access terminal. The damage was worse than I expected. Sloppy rollbacks, corrupted schedulers, authentication chains ripped apart by amateur hands. Crestline hadn't just broken the system. They had broken the thing that made the system survivable. Discipline, continuity, experience. Every eye in the company was now looking toward one person. The woman they fired for being too old. I cracked my knuckles, took a long breath, and prepared to revive the digital organism collapsing under its own ignorance. This time, every minute was billable, and every mistake they made would cost them exactly what it was worth. The moment my remote terminal connected, Crestline's digital body lit up on my screen like a patient in full cardiac arrest. Errors firing in every direction, systems gasping for stability, dependencies screaming for the one person who understood them. I ran a silent diagnostic sweep, an old habit from years of performing preventative maintenance that leadership never wanted to pay for. The results populated slowly, painfully, like a confession. Routing orchestrator, corrupted vendor EDI sync, unstable batch schedulers, unsynced payroll engine, stalled authentication chains, broken audit logs, tampered by amateurs. None of it surprised me. Systems fail honestly, people fail loudly. And Crestline had been failing loudly for years. The real damage wasn't the corrupted files. Those could be rebuilt. The real damage was the fingerprints of panic all over everything. 3 contractors had already attempted fixes. One forced a rollback so aggressively that half the authentication paths now pointed to empty directories. Another tried to clean up scheduler tasks and erased a chain that took me 8 years to perfect. A third simply rebooted servers without checking dependency trees. It was like walking into an operating room after medical interns attempted open-heart surgery using a YouTube tutorial. I began triage. Isolate. Stabilize. Rebuild. My hands moved automatically, 19 years of muscle memory guiding every line of code, every unpatched vulnerability, every resurrected scheduler. I knew where every script lived, where every skeleton was buried, Which legacy component would crash if touched by someone who didn't respect it? While I worked, my phone buzzed. Again, Evan. Kellen's trying to stand behind your work. He told leadership he recommended bringing you back. I let out a breath that was half a laugh, half disbelief. Ambition is predictable. Incompetence even more so. Don't respond, I texted back. Document everything. It won't be long before they turn on him. He replied instantly. They already are. Leadership is meeting privately. They're furious. Good. Not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time, Crestline was being forced to confront the truth. Every ignored warning, every denied budget request, every unpaid hour, every time they replaced judgment with buzzwords. The bill had finally arrived. 3 hours into reconstruction, my terminal finally displayed something other than red. A faint green flickered across the routing engine, then another, then a third. Stability was returning, not because of Crestline, but despite them. The COO called again, his voice thin with a mix of panic and awe. Ms. Lane, how are things progressing? I've contained the spread, I said, but the routing engine needs a full rebuild, payroll too, and the vendor sync has to be rewritten from scratch. A long, heavy pause. Whatever you need, he said quietly. You have full authority. Full authority. Funny how quickly that appears once a company realizes the value of the person they discarded. Near midnight, as system lights slowly faded from red to green, Evan sent one final message. People are saying it. Without you, the company would have collapsed by morning. I leaned back, exhaustion settling into something warm. They didn't bring me back, I typed. They hired the consequences of their own decisions. By the time I finally stepped away from my laptop, Crestline's systems were breathing again. Not healthy, not whole, but stable enough to survive the night. It felt like pulling a patient back from cardiac arrest with nothing but muscle memory and stubbornness. Morning sunlight spilled across my living room as I opened the curtains. Soft, warm, a reminder that life existed outside crisis calls and blinking dashboards. My phone buzzed once. Then twice, then relentlessly. I ignored the first 15 alerts and sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the quiet like it was a luxury I'd denied myself for 21 years. Finally, a message came from Evan, short, stunned, almost reverent. They just found out you rebuilt everything overnight. I took another sip. Of course they had. Leadership always recognized competence, but only after they'd tried everything else and failed spectacularly. The next call came from COO Graham Rourke. This time, his voice sounded different. Not frantic, not commanding. Just humbled. Ms. Lane, he began, on behalf of Crestline, thank you. Our partners confirm their routing windows are functional again. Billing and payroll are stabilizing. The board would like to meet with you today. There it was. Not the request to fix something, not the plea for emergency help, but the moment every corporation eventually reaches. The moment they want the person they underestimated to explain what actually happened. I'll join the meeting, I said, but remotely, under consulting terms. Of course, he replied quickly, whatever you prefer. Respect. It shouldn't have felt rare, but after 2 decades of being invisible, it did. At 9 a.m., I logged into the board's emergency video conference. A mosaic of expensive suits appeared, faces stiff, guilty, embarrassed. Crestline executives were accustomed to crises, financial setbacks, PR issues. They could spin those. But when the system stopped, when the entire engine of the company seized overnight, they were helpless. The chairwoman spoke first, cautiously. Ms. Lane, we need to understand what happened. I folded my hands and leaned back, calm and unhurried. You removed the one person who understood your infrastructure, I said, and you did it without transition planning. A ripple of discomfort moved across the screens. I continued, not cruelly, just honestly. For years, I requested documentation protocols, cross-training, infrastructure updates. You declined every one. Silence. Real silence. The kind that follows truth, not accusation. A board member finally asked, voice low, "Is this fixable long-term?" "Yes," I said, "if you stop chasing buzzwords and start respecting the people who keep you running." Another executive swallowed hard. "We underestimated you." I didn't soften. "You underestimated experience." When the meeting ended, I closed my laptop gently. Crestline had survived the night, but now they would have to survive the truth. The board meeting ended, but the aftershocks rippled through Crestline faster than any system outage ever had. Within an hour, the entire company knew the truth. Not the sanitized HR version, not the unexpected technical disruption Crestline, but the raw reality. Crestline Freight collapsed the moment they removed the woman holding their infrastructure together. My inbox flooded. Warehouse shift leads, analysts I barely remembered, drivers who worked nights, supervisors who had spent years apologizing for delays caused by leadership's shortcuts. Message after message. "We always knew it was you keeping things stable. Management never listened. I hope they're paying you what you're worth now." But the message that stood out came from Evan, voice weary, words slow. "They're questioning Kellen, hard." I sat back, letting that sink in. Not because I wanted him destroyed, not because I wanted revenge, but because accountability, real accountability, was finally landing on the person who engineered my removal without understanding anything I actually did. That afternoon, Evan called. His voice was a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "They're tearing apart the entire timeline," he said. "Every decision, every process, every ignored warning." I asked calmly, "Did anyone bring up the lack of transition documents?" A pause. Then, "Oh yes, multiple board members asked why there was no documentation for your role, no transition plan, no cross-training." "And what did Kellen say?" Evan hesitated. "He told them you refused to provide documentation." I laughed, not loudly, not bitterly, just a quiet, cold exhale. "Evan, you've seen my requests, dozens of them." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I forwarded everything." I froze. Everything? Every email you sent, every attachment, every ignored request, every timestamp, every escalation ticket. All of it. For a moment, I didn't speak, not from shock, but from something far rarer. Validation, genuine, overdue validation. "And the board?" I asked. "They were furious," he whispered. "Not at you, at him." Less than an hour later, my phone rang again. COO Graham Rourke. His voice was low, careful, almost gentle. "Ms. Lane, I wanted you to hear this from me directly." A beat of silence. "We've removed Kellen from his position, effective immediately. He will not be returning to Crestline leadership." Removed. A word that carried weight, not vengeance, not cruelty, but consequence. The consequence of arrogance. The consequence of ignoring expertise. The consequence of firing a backbone you never bothered to understand. "I see," I said simply. No celebration, no gloating. Just truth, settling quietly where it belonged. Rourke exhaled. "Ms. Lane, you were right about everything." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest Crestline had ever come. That evening, as the sky dimmed and the house filled with soft, familiar quiet, a final message arrived from Lena, a junior analyst who once shadowed me years ago. "Everyone always looked up to you. Today, the whole company finally learned why." I closed my laptop slowly. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just peace. At last, the truth had caught up. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not from anxiety, not from an alert tone, not from the mental checklist of crisis scenarios I'd carried in my head for 2 decades. I woke because the house was quiet. Truly quiet. For the first time in years, my day didn't begin with system logs, outage predictions, or leadership-demanding miracles disguised as quick requests. No blinking dashboards, no red indicators, no weight on my chest. Just sunlight. I brewed coffee, opened the back door, and stepped onto my porch. Birdsong replaced the hum of failing servers. Warm air replaced fluorescent lighting. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to prevent someone else's disaster. My phone buzzed. COO Graham Rourke. I let it vibrate twice before reading the message. Whenever you're ready, we'd like to formalize a long-term consulting partnership. No pressure, just deep appreciation. A year ago, I would have responded instantly, eagerly, gratefully. Back then, I still believed loyalty meant security. I believed hard work protected you. I believed institutional memory mattered. Now I knew better. I didn't need Crestline. Crestline needed me. I set the phone aside and opened my laptop, not to check their systems, not to monitor anything, but to start a document I'd been thinking about for years. Lane Systems Consulting, independent infrastructure architects specializing in hybrid architecture stabilization, disaster recovery, legacy modernization, and executive risk mitigation. My own rules, my own hours, my own value defined by me, not discounted by anyone else. I typed the first line of my mission statement. Experience isn't outdated. Experience is infrastructure. The words felt right, sharp, true. By the time the sun climbed higher, I had outlined pricing tiers, service packages, retainer options, and an onboarding sequence. Crestline wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything I should have claimed years ago. Later that afternoon, I finally picked up the COO's call. Ms. Lane, we hope you'll consider returning full-time, he said. The board is prepared to make a substantial offer. I smiled softly, politely, with the clarity of someone who finally understood her worth. I'll consider continued consulting, I said, but I'm not returning full-time. A quiet pause. Acceptance. Respect. Because they finally understood. You can't own someone you once discarded. You can only rent their expertise and pay what it's worth. I ended the call, closed my laptop, and stepped back onto the porch. For the first time in 21 years, I wasn't walking into a crisis. I was walking into my life. A life built on my terms, my value, my future. And to anyone listening now, I ask you, where are you watching from? And have you ever faced a moment that finally made you understand your own true worth? If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, share it with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next.